Hello. I have been asked to present an adaptation of Maria's story. This story was written by Barb Dennen, a United Methodist pastor in Des Moines, Iowa. Every time I have the opportunity to read a story like this that has to do with immigration, I can't help but recall a sonnet. The sonnet was written by Emma Lazarus, a Jewish-American poet who wrote and donated her sonnet to the effort to raise money for the pedestal for the Statue of Liberty that stands in New York Harbor. Her words became Lady Liberty's voice, and they are engraved on a plaque that is on that pedestal in New York Harbor. I'm sure they will be familiar to you. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Maria died on a Monday night. The cause of death, according to the coroner, was exposure. Of course, the coroner meant exposure to the elements, the drought, the heat, the cold of the desert that she crossed. But I can't help but wonder if it wasn't also exposure to unfair and unjust immigration laws. And those laws are supported, I think, by fear. But fear of what? Fear of what the Marias of the world will take from us? What could they take? Our most precious possessions, our families, our loved ones? Maria knew what it was like to be separated from her family. Maria and her mother, her two brothers, and her grandmother all lived in El Salvador during the war. Maria's mother came to the difficult decision that she could better support her family if she came to America, found a job, and sent the money back home. And so that is what she did. She eventually landed in Iowa, and she became a permanent resident. Not too long after that, Maria's two brothers joined her there. Maria stayed in El Salvador, taking care of her grandmother. Once her grandmother died, it was Maria's opportunity to rejoin her family, and she tried to do so. When she crossed the border from Mexico to Texas, she was stopped by the Border Patrol. They issued her a court date to appear before a Texas judge. Her family paid the fees necessary to move her to Iowa, and not really understanding our immigration laws and not having an attorney, she did not understand that she could have asked for a change of venue. And with Texas being so far away from Iowa, Maria did not return to go to court. And so the judge issued an automatic deportation order. 9 years later, immigration came to her door in Iowa, her family home. It was early in the morning, and they came in actually looking for another man, a man who her brothers recognized the name, but he had never lived in that home. The immigration officials asked for everyone's ID. It was then that Maria and her brother were arrested. Her brother made bond and was released. Maria was deported. Once back in El Salvador, she told her mother by phone that she intended to return to her family in America. It was her home now. That's where all of her family was. Her mother begged her not to try, but Maria was determined. She raised the money to hire a coyote. A coyote is someone who gathers people together who want to make that journey and helps them cross into America. They made it across Mexico, mostly in vans and taxis. There were about 21 people. Then they got to the desert between Arizona and Mexico. It was decided that the best way to cross would be to do so at night, walking, and it would take 2 nights to make that crossing. The first night was uneventful. The second night, helicopters discovered the group. Everyone scattered, and over half of the group was caught and returned. Maria followed the coyote and hid, and managed to escape. She and the small band that were left decided that it would be best to wait a few days and then try again by a different route. Before they started off again, she called her mother. Her mother begged her to turn back, but Maria would not. Her mother heard the fear in her daughter's voice as she recounted what had happened, and she heard about the hunger and the thirst and the high temperatures, and she also heard a cough. Maria and the little band started out the next day and were followed once more by helicopters. They hid. It was a difficult journey, and by late that evening, Maria had grown very weak and could no longer walk. One of the men that was making the trip with her had become a friend, and he carried Maria. Late that night, he realized Maria was dead. The others in the group urged him just to put her down in the desert so that they could make better time, but he refused. He said that Maria was a human being and did not deserve to be left that way. So the little group left him, and he continued to carry Maria. He walked for several hours before coming to the highway early in the morning. He placed Maria's body by the side of the road, and he walked until he found an immigration station. He was arrested, but he was able to tell the Border Patrol where to find Maria's body, and they allowed him to call her family in Iowa and explain what had happened. They were extremely grateful to the man they call a hero. Otherwise, they might never have known what had happened to Maria. He is very hopeful that he will not have to spend the many years in jail that normally await someone who has crossed the border after being deported. His attorney tells him that because of what he did for Maria and her family, that most likely he will only have to spend a couple of months in jail before being deported himself. You know, what occurs to me as I hear this story is that we all know Marias. We see them every day at the bus stop, waiting to go to their jobs as housekeepers or nannies, mowing yards, doing construction, waiting tables. They are people, working people like me. They just were born into a different circumstance than I was. The Marias, they are our tired, our poor, our huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Maria died on a Monday night. Cause of death? Exposure.